Little girl about to eat a cake receives an unknown call. "Don't eat that, my daughter," says the CEO. The crystal chandelier cast dancing shadows across the mahogany conference table as William Thompson raised his champagne glass toward the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse office. The Manhattan skyline glittered below like scattered diamonds, each light representing dreams, ambitions, and lives in motion. Tonight felt different from the countless other business celebrations he'd hosted in this very room. After 18 grueling months of negotiations, legal battles, and corporate maneuvering, the Sterling-Thompson merger was finally happening. "To new beginnings," Marcus Sterling said, his smile not quite reaching his pale blue eyes. The rival CEO had flown in from Chicago specifically for this celebration, bringing with him a small army of lawyers, accountants, and a peculiar insistence on personally catering the evening himself. His salt-and-pepper hair was perfectly styled, his Italian suit immaculate, but there was something in his demeanor that set William's nerves on edge, a familiarity that felt both uncomfortable and inexplicable. William nodded, lifting his glass in response, though something deep in his gut nagged at him like a persistent alarm. In his 40 years on this earth, 22 of them spent building Thompson Industries from a small family construction company into a billion-dollar empire that spanned 3 continents. He'd learned to trust his instincts above all else. Those instincts had saved him from bad deals, toxic partnerships, and financial disasters more times than he could count. And right now, those same instincts were screaming at him to pay attention. "The contracts are ironclad," Marcus continued, gesturing toward the stack of documents that would make him a major shareholder in William's company. The papers were thick, bound in leather folders that spoke of serious money and serious consequences. "Nothing can go wrong now. We've covered every possible contingency, every legal loophole, every financial scenario." The conference room buzzed with the quiet conversations of executives and lawyers, men and women in expensive suits, discussing profit margins and market projections, with the casual air of people for whom millions of dollars were mere numbers on spreadsheets. Crystal glasses clinked softly, filled with champagne that cost more per bottle than most people made in a week. The air was thick with the scent of success and the underlying tension that always accompanied deals of this magnitude. But William found himself staring at the elaborate cake sitting untouched on the antique side table near the windows. It was a German chocolate cake, 3 layers of rich chocolate sponge with that distinctive coconut pecan frosting that had been his late wife's absolute favorite. Catherine had made one exactly like it for every major business milestone during their 12 years of marriage, when he'd landed his first $1 million contract, when they'd expanded internationally, when Forbes had first featured him on their cover. She'd been gone for 9 years now, taken by an aggressive form of breast cancer at just 31 years old. But the sight of that cake still made his chest tighten with a mixture of love and loss that time had never fully healed. "Where did this come from?" William asked, pointing toward the dessert with a hand that he hoped didn't betray the emotion suddenly coursing through him. "I had it specially made," Marcus replied, his fingers adjusting his platinum cufflinks in what appeared to be a nervous gesture. "I remembered how much Catherine loved German chocolate cake. Thought it would be appropriate for tonight." William felt a chill run down his spine like ice water. The way Marcus said Catherine's name, with a familiarity that spoke of personal knowledge rather than business acquaintance, made his blood run cold. Marcus had known Catherine. Somehow, some way, before her death 9 years ago, Marcus Sterling had known his wife well enough to understand her preferences, her favorite dessert, the small personal details that William had never shared with business associates. "How did you know Catherine?" William asked directly, his voice cutting through the ambient conversation in the room. Marcus's carefully constructed mask slipped for just a moment, revealing something darker underneath. We knew each other years ago, before you two met. I always thought very highly of her. The room suddenly felt too small, too warm. William's mind raced through possibilities, connections he'd never considered. Catherine had rarely spoken about her life before they met, claiming it was too painful to revisit. She'd been 22 when they were introduced at a charity function, working as an event coordinator despite having a degree in literature. She'd seemed so grateful for their relationship, so eager to build a new life with him that he'd never pressed for details about her past. "That's thoughtful," William managed, his hand unconsciously moving to the wedding ring he still wore on his left hand, the simple platinum band that he'd never been able to bring himself to remove. "Though I'm afraid I'm too nervous to eat tonight. Big decisions always kill my appetite. I've learned that celebrating before the ink is completely dry can be bad luck." Marcus's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, a muscle jumping near his temple. "Of course, perhaps later when the stress wears off. Catherine always said you worked too hard, worried too much about things beyond your control." The casual mention of intimate conversations between Marcus and Catherine hit William like a physical blow. How well had Marcus known his wife? And why had Catherine never mentioned knowing someone who would later become one of his biggest competitors in the construction industry? As the evening progressed, William found himself studying Marcus with new eyes, noting details he'd previously overlooked. The way Marcus moved through the room with a confidence that suggested he'd been in similar social situations before, the casual manner in which he referenced Catherine's preferences and personality traits, the underlying tension that seemed to emanate from him whenever William declined to eat the elaborately prepared cake. When William excused himself to take a call from his Hong Kong office, a construction emergency involving a 50-story skyscraper that couldn't wait until morning, he noticed Marcus watching him leave with an expression that looked distinctly disappointed. It was the look of someone whose carefully laid plans were beginning to unravel. The call lasted longer than expected. A problem with the foundation work on a construction project in Beijing required his immediate attention and expertise. By the time he returned to the conference room 45 minutes later, most of the guests had departed, leaving behind empty champagne glasses and the lingering scent of expensive cologne. The cake sat exactly where he'd left it, not a single slice missing, its perfect frosting still pristine and untouched. "Everyone's gone," Marcus explained, gathering his papers with obvious haste, stuffing documents into his briefcase with movements that seemed almost frantic. "Long day, you know. People have early flights, morning meetings. I should take the cake with me. Hate to see such good food go to waste." "Actually, leave it," William said firmly, his voice carrying the authority he used when closing deals or shutting down negotiations. "My cleaning crew works late tonight. They're hard-working people with families. I'm sure someone will enjoy it." Marcus paused, his hand frozen halfway to his briefcase, a thin sheen of sweat visible on his forehead despite the cool air conditioning. "Are you certain? It's quite expensive. Custom-made to Catherine's exact specifications. The recipe took considerable effort to replicate." The comment about Catherine's exact specifications sent another chill through William. How could Marcus possibly know Catherine's exact recipe preferences unless he'd spent considerable time with her? The implications were starting to form a picture that William didn't want to acknowledge. "I'm certain," William replied coldly. "Thank you for the gesture, but I'd rather it benefit people who rarely get such treats." And then after Marcus left, practically fleeing really, his departure so hasty he forgot his overcoat, William remained in his office, paperwork spread across his mahogany desk, but his mind entirely focused on the growing suspicion that this evening had been about more than just a business merger. The cleaning crew would arrive soon, just after midnight as they always did, Angela Foster and her small team of dedicated workers who kept Thompson Industries spotless, working through the night while the city slept. Angela was a remarkable woman who'd been working in his building for the past 3 years. A hard-working single mother with 3 daughters, she was the kind of employee who went above and beyond without ever asking for recognition or additional compensation. William had learned through his security team that she worked multiple jobs to support her family, including stocking shelves at a grocery store during the day after finishing her night shift cleaning offices. The thought of Angela made him glance at the cake again. Her girls probably rarely experienced such expensive luxuries. Her oldest daughter was 9 years old, the same age Catherine's daughter would have been if she had lived. The thought hit him unexpectedly, a connection he'd never made before but couldn't now ignore. Catherine had been pregnant once, early in their marriage. She'd lost the baby at 6 months, a devastating blow that had taken them years to recover from. They'd never spoken about having other children after that loss, the pain too deep and too fresh. But now, looking at that cake and thinking about Angela's 9-year-old daughter, William found himself wondering about paths not taken, about the family he and Catherine might have had if circumstances had been different. He settled back into his leather chair, watching the city lights twinkle below while he waited for Angela's arrival, unaware that he was about to discover that the family he thought he'd lost forever had been right under his nose for 3 years. And that the cake intended to kill him would become the key to unlocking secrets that would change everything he thought he knew about his life, his marriage, and the love that had survived even death itself. Angela Foster pushed her cart through the marble-lined hallway of Thompson Industries, her rubber-soled shoes silent against the polished floor that reflected the soft glow of emergency lighting. At 31, she carried herself with the quiet dignity of someone who'd learned early that survival required both strength and grace. Her honey-blonde hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and her green eyes held the determined focus of a woman juggling multiple responsibilities with precision born of necessity. She'd been cleaning these offices for 3 years now, ever since she'd answered an advertisement for a night cleaning position that paid better than most day jobs. The work was honest, the building was safe, and the hours allowed her to be home when her daughters woke up for school. It wasn't the life she'd dreamed of when she was younger, but it was a good life, one she'd built through careful choices and unwavering dedication to her children. The penthouse level was always her final stop during the long night shift. Mr. Thompson usually left by 8 o'clock, but tonight his office lights were still blazing at nearly midnight, casting rectangles of golden light across the hallway. She knocked gently on the heavy oak door before entering, her cleaning supplies organized with military precision on the cart behind her. "Oh, Mrs. Foster." William looked up from his desk, his dark hair slightly disheveled from what appeared to have been a stressful evening. Even at this late hour, he carried himself with the natural authority of someone accustomed to making decisions that affected thousands of lives. "Working late again, I see." "Yes, sir." "There's extra work with the quarterly reports coming out," Angela replied, her voice carrying the slight southern accent that remained from her childhood in Georgia. "I can come back if you need more time." No, I'm not being productive anyway." William gestured toward the conference room. "Actually, there's something in there from tonight's meeting, an expensive cake that seems a shame to waste. Would you? Would your girls like it?" Angela's eyes widened with genuine surprise. In 3 years of working in this building, Mr. Thompson had always been courteous but distant. This was the first time he'd ever made such a personal gesture, the first acknowledgement that she existed as something more than just part of the building's maintenance. "That's very kind, sir, but I couldn't," she began, her pride immediately conflicting with the practical knowledge that any treat, especially an expensive one, would be a precious gift for her daughters. "Please," William insisted, standing and moving toward the conference room. "It's German chocolate cake, elaborate and expensive." It'll just go to waste otherwise, and I have a feeling your daughters would appreciate it more than anyone else." Angela followed him, her eyes taking in the professionally decorated cake with its perfect coconut pecan frosting and delicate chocolate details. It was the kind of dessert her daughters Madison, Chloe, and Zoe had only seen in bakery windows, beautiful, expensive, and utterly beyond their usual reach. "Are you sure?" she asked softly, her voice thick with emotion she was trying to control. "Absolutely, take the whole thing," William said, carefully lifting the cake box. "You work harder than anyone in this building, Mrs. Foster. Your daughters are lucky to have such a dedicated mother." As Angela carefully packed the cake into her bag, William found himself studying her with unexpected interest. There was something about her, the shape of her eyes, the gentle way she moved, even the musical quality of her southern accent, that felt familiar in a way he couldn't explain. "Mrs. Foster," he said as she prepared to leave, "your daughters, how old are they?" Angela's face immediately softened, the way it always did when she spoke of her children. "Madison is 9. She's my little helper with everything. And the twins, Chloe and Zoe, just turned 4. They're identical, but completely different personalities. 9 years old, the same age Catherine's daughter would have been." William felt an odd chill, though he couldn't explain why. "And their father?" Angela's expression tightened slightly. "Madison's father. He's never been involved, never even met her. The twins' father is incarcerated upstate, drug charges. He doesn't contribute or maintain contact. That must be incredibly difficult." "We manage fine," Angela said with quiet dignity. "The girls don't need unreliable men in their lives. They're better off with consistency and love, even if it means doing without some things." After Angela left, William remained in his office, staring out at the city lights. Something about the entire evening felt significant. Marcus's knowledge of Catherine, the elaborate cake, Angela's 9-year-old daughter. Pieces of a puzzle he didn't understand were floating around him, waiting for the right moment to click into place. What William didn't know was that Angela's presence in his building wasn't the coincidence it appeared to be. 9 years earlier, a dying woman named Catherine Thompson had made careful arrangements through her attorney, David Chang, to ensure that if anything ever happened to her, her husband would eventually find the daughter she'd given birth to, but never been able to tell him about. Catherine had used her connections and considerable resources to arrange for the adoptive mother to be offered a specific job in a specific building, working specific hours that would eventually bring her into contact with the man Catherine wanted to be part of her daughter's life. The monthly stipends that helped Angela care for Madison came from a trust fund Catherine had established, administered by David Chang, with instructions that were to remain confidential until certain conditions were met. Angela had always believed the money came from a children's charity, never suspecting that her daughter's biological mother had been planning their eventual reunion with William from beyond the grave. Catherine had known Marcus Sterling years before she met William. He'd been a brief romantic interest during her college years, someone who'd become obsessively possessive before she'd ended the relationship. She'd never told William about Marcus because the relationship had been traumatic, ending only when Marcus had threatened her, and she'd been forced to get a restraining order. That restraining order had expired years ago, but Catherine's fear of Marcus had never fully disappeared. Now, 9 years after Catherine's death, Marcus had finally found his opportunity for revenge against the man who'd stolen Catherine from him and the life he'd believed should have been his. The merger was just the vehicle. The real goal had always been William's destruction. But Catherine's most carefully laid plans were about to collide with Marcus's desire for revenge, and the cake that was meant to kill William was instead about to become the catalyst that would finally bring together the family Catherine had spent her last years trying to create. In a small apartment across town, Angela was showing her daughters the beautiful cake, completely unaware that they were about to become part of a deadly game that had been years in the making, or that the gift she thought came from her employer's kindness was actually the first step in reuniting a father with the daughter he'd never known existed. The next morning arrived grey and drizzling, the kind of November weather that seemed to leach colour from everything it touched. William Thompson sat in his corner office, surrounded by the merger contracts that should have represented triumph, but instead filled him with a growing sense of unease. Something about Marcus Sterling's behaviour the previous evening continued to gnaw at him. The man's intimate knowledge of Catherine, the way he'd spoken her name with such familiarity, the obvious disappointment when William had refused to eat the elaborate cake. His assistant, Jennifer Mills, knocked and entered with the brisk efficiency that had made her indispensable over their 15-year working relationship. Her face was pale, her usual professional composure clearly shaken. "Mr. Thompson, there's been a serious incident," she said, consulting her notes with hands that trembled slightly. William looked up sharply from the financial projections he'd been pretending to review. What kind of incident? "Marcus Sterling was found unconscious in his suite at the Plaza Hotel this morning," Jennifer continued, her voice tight with controlled anxiety. "He's currently in intensive care at Mount Sinai Hospital. The initial diagnosis is severe poisoning, though doctors are running extensive toxicology tests." The world seemed to tilt sideways. "Poisoning?" "Hotel security found disturbing evidence in his room during their investigation," Jennifer said, checking her notes again. "Empty chemical vials, some kind of makeshift laboratory set up in the bathroom. The police have taken over the case and are treating this as attempted murder." William's blood turned to ice as the horrifying implications crashed over him. The cake. Marcus's insistence on providing it personally, his knowledge of Catherine's favourite dessert, his desperate attempt to take it with him when William refused to eat it. "Get Detective Rodriguez on the phone immediately," William commanded, his voice sharp with authority masking growing panic, "and clear my schedule for the rest of the day." Within 90 minutes, the conference room was swarming with crime scene technicians and forensic specialists working with methodical precision. Detective Maria Rodriguez, a sharp-eyed woman in her mid-40s, with the weathered expression of someone who'd seen humanity's darkest impulses, supervised as her team carefully packaged the remaining cake. "Preliminary field tests show high concentrations of oleander extract," she informed William, her voice professionally neutral, but her eyes reflecting the gravity of the situation. "Highly refined, professionally prepared. Anyone who consumed this would have experienced severe cardiac symptoms within 30 to 60 minutes, followed by complete organ failure and death within hours." William felt his legs go weak. But Marcus, how did he get poisoned if he brought the cake? "Cross-contamination during preparation," Detective Rodriguez explained. "He was sloppy with the poison while making the cake. The irony is brutal. Killed by his own murder weapon." She studied William carefully. "Make no mistake, Mr. Thompson. You were the intended target. This was premeditated murder disguised as a business celebration." "But why? The merger benefits him enormously." "That's exactly why," Rodriguez replied grimly. "Our investigation reveals that Sterling is drowning in debt, gambling losses, failed investments, lifestyle expenses far exceeding his income. His company is essentially bankrupt. But the merger contracts give him controlling interest in Thompson Industries if you die or become incapacitated. He wouldn't just profit from your death, he'd inherit your empire." William sank into his chair, the weight of betrayal crushing down on him. Someone had tried to murder him using Catherine's favourite cake, a violation so personal it felt like an attack on her memory as well. "Mr. Thompson," Rodriguez's voice cut through his anguish with new urgency. "We need to know immediately. Did anyone else have access to that cake? Anyone who might have taken it home?" The blood drained from William's face as the full horror hit him. "Oh, God! Angela! Who is Angela?" "Angela Foster. One of our cleaning staff," William explained, his voice rising with panic. "I gave her the cake last night, told her to take it home to her 3 daughters. Christ, what have I done?" Detective Rodriguez was already on her radio, calling for immediate backup and emergency medical response. "We need Angela Foster's address now. Dispatch ambulances to that location. Code Red, potential child poisoning." As they raced through the city in an unmarked police car, sirens wailing, William's mind reeled with horrible possibilities. Angela's 3 daughters, Madison, 9 years old, and 4-year-old twins Chloe and Zoe. Innocent children who might be dying because of his gesture of kindness. His phone buzzed with a call from his attorney, David Chang. Normally he would have ignored it, but something made him answer. "William, I found the documents you requested from Catherine's safety deposit box," David said without preamble. "There's something here you need to know immediately. It's about a daughter." William's world stopped. "What did you say?" "Catherine had a daughter, William, before she met you. Her name is Madison Rose. Catherine placed her for adoption when she was just weeks old, but she never stopped providing for her financial support." William stared ahead at the traffic as pieces began falling into place with sickening clarity. "David, what was the daughter's full name?" "Madison Rose Thompson. Catherine legally changed her last name before the adoption." "William, according to these documents, Madison was adopted by Angela Foster." The phone slipped from William's nerveless fingers as the complete picture crystallized. Madison Foster, the 9-year-old girl about to potentially die from poisoned cake, was Catherine's daughter, his stepdaughter. The family he thought he'd never had been literally right under his nose for 3 years. "Pull over," he commanded Detective Rodriguez. "We can't stop now." "Pull over!" William's voice carried absolute authority. As the car screeched to the curb, William's hands shook as he retrieved his phone and dialed Angela's number. It rang once, twice, 3 times before a young voice answered. "Hello? Is this Madison?" William asked, his voice barely controlled. "Yes, sir. Mommy's in the shower. Can I take a message?" "Madison, this is very important. Did you and your sisters eat any of the cake your mother brought home last night?" "We were going to," Madison said, in the precociously mature voice of a 9-year-old forced to grow up quickly. "But it tasted funny, kind of bitter. Mommy said we should save it for later." William closed his eyes, relief flooding through him so intensely he nearly collapsed. "Madison, I need you to listen very carefully. Do not eat any more of that cake. Do you understand me? It's very important." "Okay," Madison said, clearly confused but obedient. "Are you the man who gave it to Mommy?" "Yes, and I'm coming to see you right now. Can you tell your mother that Mr. Thompson called?" "Okay, Mr. Thompson. Should I tell her anything else?" William looked ahead at the ambulances racing toward their location, knowing that in minutes he would meet the daughter Catherine had given birth to, but never been able to tell him about. "Tell her," William said softly, "that Catherine's husband is coming home." The apartment building stood before them like a testament to urban resilience. 5 stories of weathered brick that had housed working families for decades, fire escapes creating geometric patterns against the grey morning sky. Detective Rodriguez led the charge up the narrow staircase, her radio crackling with updates while William followed, his heart pounding with a mixture of fear and anticipation that seemed to echo in the confined space. "Third floor, apartment 3B, Rodriguez called over her shoulder as they climbed past the second landing, where the mingled scents of different cultures' breakfast foods created a surprisingly comforting atmosphere despite the emergency circumstances. When they reached Angela's door, William could hear voices inside. Calm, professional tones of paramedics mixed with a woman's worried questions and children's voices. Through the thin walls, he caught fragments of conversation that made his anxiety spike. Precautionary measures, activated charcoal, observation protocol. Detective Rodriguez pushed through the door first, her badge clearly visible as she surveyed the scene. The apartment was small but meticulously maintained, every surface clean and organized despite obvious financial constraints. Second-hand furniture had been arranged with care. Children's artwork adorned the refrigerator, and a small dining table showed evidence of an interrupted breakfast, the normal morning routine of a family suddenly thrust into crisis. "Where are they?" William asked, pushing past the detective with urgency he couldn't contain. "Living room," one of the paramedics responded. "3 children, ages 9 and 4. The mother reports they consumed small portions of cake approximately an hour ago, but we arrived before any serious symptoms developed." William rounded the corner and felt his entire understanding of the world shift dramatically. There, on a worn but immaculately clean sofa, sat 3 little girls, in various states of confusion about the sudden attention they were receiving. The 9-year-old, Madison, had honey-blonde hair exactly like her mother's, and eyes that were so startlingly familiar they took his breath away, Catherine's eyes. The same shape, the same intelligent depth, the same way of observing the world with quiet understanding. The twins, Chloe and Zoe, were 4-year-old mirror images of each other, their blonde curls catching the morning light streaming through the apartment's single large window. They clung to their older sister with the instinctive trust that children have for the person who takes care of them when their mother can't. Angela stood beside them, still wearing her cleaning uniform from the night shift, her face pale with terror that she was fighting to control for her daughter's sake. Her voice remained steady as she tried to provide comfort, while clearly not understanding the full scope of what was happening. "It's okay, babies," she murmured, stroking Chloe's hair. "These nice people just want to make sure you're healthy and strong." "Mommy, why can't we finish our cake?" Zoe asked in the direct way of 4-year-olds who haven't learned to be afraid of asking questions. "Because—" Angela's voice wavered slightly before she steadied herself with visible effort. "Because Mommy wants to save it for a special occasion." William stepped forward, his hands trembling, as he took in the scene that was simultaneously his worst nightmare and his greatest hope. On the kitchen counter, he could see they'd cut modest pieces from the elaborate cake. Thank God, modest pieces. Not enough to be fatal if their timing was right and medical intervention was swift. "Mrs. Foster," he said quietly, his voice thick with emotions he was struggling to process. "I'm so sorry. This is entirely my fault." Angela looked up at him with confusion that was rapidly transforming into something closer to alarm. "Mr. Thompson, what are you doing here? I don't understand why there are paramedics in my apartment." Detective Rodriguez stepped forward, her professional demeanor softening appropriately in the presence of frightened children. "Ma'am, we need to explain something serious about that cake. There's been a medical emergency involving the person who provided it to Mr. Thompson." As the detective carefully explained the situation, William watched Angela's face cycle through disbelief, comprehension, horror, and finally a fierce protective anger that made her green eyes flash with an intensity that reminded him powerfully of Catherine when she was defending something she cared about. "Someone tried to poison my children." Her voice was deadly quiet, the kind of controlled fury that preceded either collapse or explosive action. "The poison was intended for me," William said, stepping closer despite the chaos around them. "Mrs. Foster, I gave you that cake without knowing. Dear God, I could have killed your daughters." One of the paramedics, a young woman with kind eyes and gentle hands, knelt beside Madison with professional competence. "Sweetie, I need you to tell me exactly what happened with the cake this morning. Can you help me understand?" Madison, who had been watching the adult conversation with the serious attention of a child accustomed to understanding more than she should have to, nodded gravely. "We each had a small piece of the chocolate cake, but it tasted wrong, bitter and strange, so we stopped eating it pretty quickly." "How small was the piece you ate?" the paramedic asked with careful patience. Madison held up her fingers, indicating something about the size of a large bite. "About this big. The twins had even smaller pieces because I gave them less to start with." William felt his knees nearly buckle with relief, so intense it was almost physically painful. Small pieces. They'd only consumed small portions, and their natural instincts had protected them from eating more when something tasted wrong. Children's unfiltered responses to unfamiliar tastes might have saved their lives. "We need to transport all 3 children to the hospital for comprehensive observation and preventive treatment," the lead paramedic announced with professional calm. "The toxin involved is highly dangerous, but if we've caught this early enough, we can prevent any serious harm." "I'm coming with them," Angela declared immediately, grabbing a small bag and efficiently stuffing it with what appeared to be essential items for an extended hospital stay. "So am I," William added, surprising everyone in the room, including himself. Angela turned to stare at him with an expression that mixed gratitude with confusion. "Mr. Thompson, you don't have any obligation to—" "Yes, I do," he interrupted, his voice carrying a conviction that came from somewhere deeper than business responsibility. "This happened because of my decision. I'm not leaving until I know they're completely safe." As the paramedics prepared the children for transport, William's phone rang insistently. The caller ID showed David Chang, his personal attorney. Something about the timing felt significant enough that he stepped aside to answer. "William, I'm at your office with the contents of Catherine's private safety deposit box," David said, without any preliminary pleasantries. "You need to hear this immediately. There's a letter here, sealed and marked, 'For William, open only after my death.' It's about Madison." William's world stopped spinning entirely. "What does it say?" "Catherine explains everything, William. She had Madison when she was 22, during a brief relationship that ended badly. She placed her for adoption because she was already showing early symptoms of the genetic cancer markers that would eventually kill her." William stared across the small apartment at Madison, whose familiar green eyes were watching the paramedics with calm intelligence. "Continue." "She kept track of Madison through the adoption agency, William. She knew about Angela, knew where they lived, even arranged for Angela to get the job at Thompson Industries 3 years ago. Catherine wanted you to eventually find Madison, but she died before she could tell you herself." The pieces fell into place with stunning clarity. Catherine hadn't just died and left him alone. She'd spent her final years arranging for him to find the daughter she'd never been able to tell him about, creating circumstances that would naturally bring them together when the time was right. "David," William whispered into the phone, "what was Marcus Sterling's connection to Catherine?" According to the letter, Marcus was the father who abandoned Catherine when she told him about the pregnancy. He became obsessive and threatening when she ended the relationship. She had to get a restraining order against him. William closed his eyes as the final piece of the puzzle locked into place. Marcus hadn't just tried to kill him for business reasons. This had been personal revenge against the man who'd given Catherine the love and stability that Marcus had refused to provide. The merger had simply been his vehicle for getting close enough to strike. "There's one more thing," David continued. "Catherine established a trust fund for Madison's care, administered through my office. The monthly payments that Angela receives for Madison's expenses, those come from Catherine's carefully planned provisions. She's been taking care of her daughter financially for 9 years, even after death. William looked at Angela with new understanding. The monthly assistance she'd always attributed to a children's charity had actually been Catherine's way of ensuring Madison was provided for while waiting for the right moment to reunite her with the only father figure Catherine wanted her to have. "Mr. Thompson." Angela's voice brought him back to the immediate crisis. "The ambulance is ready." As they prepared to leave for the hospital, William realized that the worst thing that had ever almost happened to him, nearly losing Catherine's daughter to the same poison meant to kill him, had actually become the catalyst for discovering the family he'd never known he had. Catherine's careful planning, interrupted by her death, had finally come to fruition in the most unexpected way possible. "Mrs. Foster," he said as they walked toward the ambulance, "there's something I need to tell you about Madison's birth mother." Angela paused, her hand on Madison's shoulder. "What about her?" "Her name was Catherine Thompson," William said softly, "and she was my wife." The pediatric emergency room at Mount Sinai Hospital hummed with the controlled urgency that characterizes the best medical facilities, where life and death decisions are made with calm efficiency by professionals who understand that panic serves no one. William sat in an uncomfortable plastic chair that had been designed more for easy cleaning than comfort, watching Angela pace the short corridor outside the treatment rooms where her 3 daughters were undergoing comprehensive medical evaluation. 4 hours had passed since their arrival, 4 hours of blood tests, cardiac monitoring, and carefully administered treatments designed to counteract the effects of oleander poisoning before symptoms could develop. The medical team had been cautiously optimistic from the beginning. The children had consumed only small amounts of the toxin, and their natural aversion to the bitter taste had prevented them from eating enough to cause fatal damage. Detective Rodriguez had positioned herself near the nurses' station, coordinating with the ongoing investigation while maintaining a protective presence. The Marcus Sterling case had exploded into a multi-jurisdictional investigation involving attempted murder, corporate fraud, and a revenge scheme that had been years in the making. But William's attention was focused entirely on the woman whose world had been turned upside down by revelations that should have been impossible to believe. Angela had been remarkably quiet since his announcement about Catherine, processing information that challenged everything she thought she knew about her daughter's background and her own place in an elaborate plan that had taken 9 years to unfold. "Tell me about her," Angela finally said, settling into the chair beside him with the exhausted grace of someone who had been running on adrenaline for hours. "Tell me about Catherine." William pulled out his wallet and extracted the small photograph he always carried. Catherine at their wedding, radiant in ivory silk, her green eyes sparkling with the joy and hope that had characterized their entire relationship. "She was the most remarkable person I've ever known," he began, his voice soft with memories that had been painful for 9 years, but now carried the possibility of continuation through Madison. Brilliant, compassionate, and strong in ways that most people never have to discover about themselves. When we met, she was 22 and working as an event coordinator, despite having a literature degree. I was 30 and thought I understood how the world worked. Angela studied the photograph with intense concentration, her eyes tracing Catherine's features with the careful attention of someone looking for answers to questions she'd carried for 9 years without even knowing she was carrying them. "She taught me that success without purpose is just elaborate emptiness," William continued, allowing himself to remember Catherine not just as the woman who had died, but as the person who had shaped every important decision he'd made since meeting her. "Before Catherine, I was building an empire, but I didn't understand why. She showed me that businesses should serve communities, that wealth comes with the responsibility to make life better for people who need help." "She died 9 years ago?" Angela asked quietly, her voice carefully controlled. "Breast cancer." Diagnosed at stage 4 when Madison was just 6 months old, fought it for 18 months with more courage than anyone should ever have to show. She died on a Tuesday morning in October, holding my hand and making me promise that love doesn't end with death. It just transforms into something different. William paused, remembering that final moment when Catherine's breathing had stopped and his understanding of family had seemed to end forever. I never knew about Madison. Catherine never told me she had a daughter, never mentioned her pregnancy or the adoption. Maybe she was protecting everyone involved, Angela suggested, with the instinctive empathy that had made her such an extraordinary mother to 3 children who weren't biologically hers. If she was dying, if she knew she couldn't be there to raise Madison herself, maybe she thought it would be too painful for you and too complicated for Madison to form attachments that would be broken by death. Before William could respond, Doctor. Sarah Chen emerged from the treatment area, clipboard in hand, and an expression that made both adults stand immediately and search her face for any indication of what they were about to hear. Mr. Thompson, Ms. Foster, Doctor. Chen looked tired but genuinely relieved, the expression of a medical professional delivering news that could have been tragic but wasn't. I have very good news. All 3 children are going to be perfectly fine. The relief that flooded through William was so intense, it felt like a physical force, nearly bringing him to his knees. They're completely okay? The amount of oleander extract they ingested was significant enough to require treatment, but not nearly enough to cause lasting harm, Dr. Chen explained, with the precision that comes from years of delivering complex medical information to frightened families. Several factors worked in their favor. They only ate small portions because the bitter taste deterred them. You brought them in quickly enough for us to administer preventive treatment. And children's metabolisms sometimes process plant toxins more efficiently than adult systems. When can we see them? Angela asked, her voice barely steady despite the good news. They're awake and asking for their mother. Dr. Chen smiled with the genuine warmth that makes exceptional doctors exceptional. Madison has been quite the little caretaker, helping to keep the twins calm during the procedures. She's a remarkable child with exceptional emotional maturity. As they followed the doctor down the hallway toward the recovery rooms, William felt his phone buzz with another call from David Chang. This time, he answered immediately, sensing that the timing was significant. William, I've read Catherine's complete letter, David said without preamble, his voice thick with emotions that professional attorneys rarely allow themselves to express. It's heartbreaking and beautiful and explains absolutely everything. William stopped walking, leaning against the hospital wall for support. Tell me. Catherine had Madison during a brief relationship when she was 22. The father was Marcus Sterling, though she doesn't mention him by name in the letter, just describes him as someone who became frighteningly obsessive when she tried to end things. The final piece of Marcus's motivation clicked into place with sickening clarity. This hadn't just been about money or business rivalry. It had been about destroying the man who had given Catherine the love and family that Marcus had been too immature and selfish to provide. She placed Madison for adoption because she was already showing early symptoms of the genetic cancer markers that would kill her, David continued. But William, she never stopped being Madison's mother. She kept track of her through the adoption agency, knew about Angela's financial struggles, even arranged for Angela to get the job at Thompson Industries. William closed his eyes, overwhelmed by the magnitude of Catherine's love and foresight. She planned this. Every detail. She wanted you to find Madison naturally when the time was right. The monthly payments that Angela receives for Madison's expenses, those come from a trust fund Catherine established, administered through my office with instructions that were to remain confidential until certain conditions were met. Angela had been listening to his side of the conversation with growing amazement. What monthly payments? William lowered the phone, looking at Angela with a mixture of sadness and wonder that Catherine's love had extended so far beyond her death. You've been receiving financial assistance from Madison for 9 years, haven't you? Money you thought came from a children's charity. Every month, Angela whispered, understanding dawning in her eyes. Enough to make sure Madison had what she needed: clothes, school supplies, medical care. I always thought we'd been extraordinarily lucky to qualify for such long-term assistance. Catherine never stopped taking care of her daughter, William said softly. She just loved Madison enough to let someone else raise her while making sure she was provided for. They reached the recovery room where Madison and the twins were resting. Through the window, William could see Madison sitting up in her bed, reading a picture book to Chloe and Zoe, who were curled up together in the bed next to hers. The sight hit him with emotional force that was both devastating and healing. This was Catherine's daughter, carrying on her mother's legacy of taking care of others, of being strong when strength was needed most. "Mrs. Foster," William said, turning to Angela with a decision that felt as natural and inevitable as breathing. "I know this is overwhelming, and I know you have every right to tell me to leave your family alone, but Catherine's last wish was for me to take care of Madison, as if she were my own daughter." Angela's eyes filled with tears, but her voice remained steady. "What exactly are you saying?" "I'm saying that Madison is already exactly where she belongs, with someone who loves her unconditionally and has raised her to be an extraordinary person. But I'd like to be part of her life if you'll allow it. I'd like to honor Catherine's wish while respecting the incredible job you've done as her mother." "And Chloe and Zoe?" Angela asked quietly, because she had learned long ago that accepting help for one child while excluding others was not an option for her conscience. William looked through the window again, watching as Madison gently adjusted Chloe's blanket and whispered something that made Zoe giggle despite the medical equipment surrounding them. "All 3 of your daughters almost died today because of my decision to give you that cake," he said with absolute conviction. "That makes them my responsibility too. If you'll let me, I'd like to help. Not because I have to, but because they're Madison's family, which makes them part of Catherine's legacy, which makes them part of mine." For the first time since the nightmare had begun, Angela smiled through her tears. I think Catherine would have approved of that. 8 months later, William Thompson stood in the kitchen of Angela's new house, a beautiful 4-bedroom colonial in a neighborhood with excellent schools, tree-lined streets, and the kind of front yard where children could play safely while their parents watched from kitchen windows. The monthly mortgage was something Angela could never have managed on multiple minimum wage jobs, but it represented a tiny fraction of William's charitable foundation budget, and seeing Madison's face when she realized she had her own room with built-in bookshelves had been worth every penny and more. "Daddy William, you're going to burn those pancakes," Madison announced from her perch on a kitchen stool, where she was carefully measuring ingredients for what had become their Saturday morning tradition. At 10 years old now, she had grown into her role as William's daughter, with the same grace and intelligence she applied to everything else in her life. William turned from the stove, grinning at the child, who had effortlessly adapted to calling him Daddy William to distinguish him from Mommy Angela. "No." The title still made his heart skip every time he heard it, a reminder of the family he'd gained through the most unexpected and terrifying circumstances imaginable. "I am not burning them," he protested, flipping a perfectly golden pancake with exaggerated precision. "I'm adding character through careful caramelization." "That's what you said last week when you made them black," Chloe chimed in from the living room, where she and Zoe were building an elaborate fairy castle out of blocks and pillows. At 5 years old now, the twins had developed into distinctly different personalities. Chloe, the thoughtful observer who noticed everything. Zoe, the fearless adventurer who approached life with enthusiastic confidence. but both had accepted William's presence in their lives with the remarkable adaptability that children display when they recognize genuine love. Angela emerged from the home office she used for her work as Director of Community Outreach for the Thompson Foundation, dressed in the professional attire she wore to coordinate charitable programs that helped families in crisis. It was work that utilized her natural empathy and practical experience with poverty, ensuring that other children would never have to experience the kind of desperation that had once characterized their lives. "How's our Saturday morning chef doing?" she asked, wrapping her arms around William's waist and peering over his shoulder at the pancakes. 8 months of shared breakfasts, bedtime stories, and the daily negotiations that characterize family life had taught both of them that love could grow in the most unexpected circumstances and flourish when nurtured with patience and commitment. "Your daughter is an exceptionally harsh critic of my culinary efforts," William replied, leaning into her embrace with the contentment of someone who had finally found where he belonged. "She gets that intellectual precision from her birth mother," Angela said softly, a comment that no longer carried pain, but rather appreciation for the woman whose love had orchestrated their unlikely family reunion. The morning routine continued with the comfortable chaos that characterizes real family life. Syrup spills, spirited debates over who deserved the last blueberry, and Zoe's determination to eat her pancakes with her fingers, despite repeated gentle reminders about proper utensil usage. It was messy and loud and absolutely perfect in ways that William had never imagined possible. Later, after Angela left for a foundation meeting and the twins settled down for their Saturday afternoon movie, William found himself in Madison's room, helping her organize the bookshelf that had become inadequate for her rapidly expanding personal library. She was reading at a level far beyond her years, consuming everything from classic literature to contemporary young adult novels about strong heroines who solved problems through intelligence and determination rather than waiting for rescue. "Daddy William," Madison said quietly, pulling a worn book from the shelf and sitting cross-legged on her bed with the serious expression she wore when addressing important topics. "Do you think my birth mother would be proud of who I'm becoming?" William set down the stack of books he'd been organizing and moved to sit beside her, recognizing one of those moments when parental wisdom was more important than any business decision he'd ever made. These conversations happened periodically, moments when Madison's natural curiosity about her origins required honest, thoughtful responses that honored both Catherine's memory and Angela's role as the mother who had actually raised her. "I think your birth mother would be incredibly proud of you," he said with complete honesty. "You're kind, intelligent, brave, and caring. You take excellent care of your sisters, you work hard in school, and you make everyone around you better just by being yourself. Those are exactly the qualities Catherine hoped you would develop." "Do you miss her?" Madison asked, her green eyes so remarkably like Catherine's, studying his face with the unsettling perceptiveness that children sometimes display when asking questions that adults have trouble answering. "Every day," William admitted without hesitation, "but not in a sad way anymore. I miss her the way you miss summer when autumn arrives, grateful for the beautiful experience and looking forward to the next wonderful season that's coming." Madison nodded solemnly, processing this adult concept with the seriousness she applied to everything she considered important. "I think she sent me to you and Mommy Angela on purpose. Like a gift that took a really long time to be delivered." William felt his throat tighten with emotion that was both grief for Catherine and gratitude for the wisdom of the 10-year-old sitting beside him. "I think you're absolutely right about that." From the living room came the familiar sound of the twins debating movie selections, followed by Angela's voice as she returned from her meeting earlier than expected and began the process of negotiating a peaceful resolution to their disagreement. "Girls, come help me put away these groceries." Madison jumped up from the bed with characteristic energy, then paused in the doorway with the thoughtful expression that always preceded her most serious questions. "Daddy William, do you think we could visit her grave sometime soon? I'd like to tell her about our family and how happy we are." "I think that's a beautiful idea," William replied, meaning it completely. "We'll go together, all 5 of us. Catherine would love to hear about everything that's happened." As Madison ran to help with the groceries, William remained in her room for a moment, surrounded by the evidence of a child's life well lived. Artwork on the walls, beloved stuffed animals on the bed, a desk organized with school projects, and thank-you notes from classmates she'd helped with difficult assignments. His phone buzzed with a text message from Detective Rodriguez. Sterling pled guilty to attempted murder and conspiracy, sentenced to 25 years minimum. "Thought you'd want to know this chapter is finally closed." William smiled, typing back a brief message of gratitude. The legal nightmare that had brought their family together was officially over, but the love that had emerged from that crisis would last forever. 8 months ago, he had been a successful but fundamentally lonely man, building a business empire without understanding its true purpose. Today, he was father to 3 remarkable daughters, partner to an extraordinary woman, and keeper of Catherine's greatest legacy. Not the financial success or the charitable foundations, but the love that had somehow survived death and brought them all together in ways none of them could have imagined. As he walked toward the kitchen, where his family was laughing over some shared joke while organizing groceries with the kind of domestic teamwork that develops naturally when people genuinely care about each other, William could almost hear Catherine's voice speaking the words she'd whispered to him during those final moments 9 years ago. "Love doesn't end with death, it just changes form." She had been absolutely right. As she was about most important things, love had simply transformed, growing larger and stronger and more encompassing than he'd ever believed possible. And somewhere beyond the boundaries of life and death, he was certain Catherine was smiling, knowing that her daughter had found her way home to the family she'd always been meant to have, guided by love that had transcended every obstacle, including death itself. "Daddy William!" Zoe called out as he entered the kitchen, her small voice bright with excitement. "Come see what Mommy bought for dinner." William hurried toward his family, toward the laughter and chaos and beautiful imperfection of real life, knowing with absolute certainty that this was exactly where Catherine had always intended him to be. The poisoned cake that had nearly destroyed everything had instead revealed the greatest gift imaginable, the chance to love and be loved by the family he never knew he was missing, brought together by a woman whose love had proven stronger than death itself. And in that moment, surrounded by his 3 daughters and the woman who had raised Catherine's child with such grace and wisdom, William Thompson understood that sometimes the most terrible near tragedies become the catalysts for the most beautiful miracles. Sometimes the things that almost break us are exactly what we need to discover we were never actually broken, just incomplete, waiting for the missing pieces to find their way home.